Hi everybody, I'm Laurie, VP of Developer Relations at LlamaIndex, and today I'm going to be walking you through a multi-agent concierge implemented with our new workflows abstraction. One of the cool things about our workflows abstraction is that it allows automatic rendering of a flow diagram. Now, I realize that this flow diagram is pretty intimidating, um, but I'll guide you through it. Basically, the multi-agent concierge that we've built is simulating a financial system where you can uh, look up stock prices, you can get your balance, and you can transfer money. Some of those steps require authentication, so there's an authentication step as well. We can see from our start event, we go to a concierge. The concierge is an agent that simply asks you what it is that you want to do. It generates orchestrator events, which go to an orchestrator function, which we're going to look at. What the orchestrator does is pretty interesting. It takes natural language expressions of what the user wants to do, and it translates them into programmatic expressions of what agent should be required to perform that. So as you can see, there's a lot of arrows going out from the orchestrator. It can go to a stock lookup event. It can go to an account balance event. It can go to a transfer money event. And you can see it's sneaking over to an authenticate event here. So the orchestrator can let you do anything that you do in the event. The stock lookup event triggers the stock lookup function, which sends you back to the concierge because you're done. But if you go to the transfer money event, it'll send you to the transfer money function, which, depending on whether or not you are authenticated, can send you to the authenticate event, which sends you to authenticate first, and then sends you back to the concierge event. The concierge event has special logic in it, which if you were trying to transfer money and you got sent back to the concierge, it will know that you were trying to do some larger task, and so the concierge event will send you back through the concierge, through the orchestrator, and back to transfer money to complete your task. Let's see that in action first. So I'm going to run my workflow. You can see it's running the concierge step, which runs an initialize step because this is the first time I've run it. And this text in purple is the text that's intended to be shown to the user. All the text in black is debug code. So let's say we want to look up a stock price. You can see it produces the orchestrator event. The orchestrator got the request to look up a stock price, and it emitted a stock lookup event, which means that the stock lookup step gets run. It asks for the name of the company or its stock symbol. Let's say Apple Computer. Looking up a stock price for Apple Computer. The stock price for Apple Computer is $100. And then it sends us back. You can see it runs step concierge again, and it sends us back to the beginning. So let's see how that was actually done. When you're building a workflow, first you have to bring in your imports and your environment, obviously, and then you define events. All of our events are pretty simple. There's the initialize event, which I'm going to talk about. There's a concierge event, and then there's the orchestrator event, and then there's a stock lookup, an authenticate, an account balance, and a transfer money event. These are the 4 things that you can actually do. Workflows are are usually implemented as classes with multiple steps. So here we're defining our concierge workflow, which descends from the workflow class, and we're defining here multiple steps. So the first step that's defined is initialize, which accepts an initialize event. But workflows always start with a start event. So actually, even though it's defined second, the first function that will get run is the concierge function because it's defined here as accepting a start event. The first thing it does is it checks if the user is defined. If the user is not defined, it returns an initialize event. By returning an event, it triggers that event. So because the workflow receives an initialize event, it knows that it should trigger the function that accepts that event. So it goes to initialize and it sets things up and it returns a concierge event. So it bounces you back to the concierge. That was what we saw in our output. Which is here. Right. We ran step concierge, which produced an initialize event, which ran initialize, which bounced us back to the concierge event. Now that we're past initialization, we're setting up our first agent, which is the concierge agent. We give it a prompt which says you're a helpful agent that lets you do these 4 things. And we don't give it any tools because the concierge agent doesn't need to call any tools. It is just for talking. Now we have a little cascade of logic here, which checks for various states that the user can be in. In the initial state, however, we can skip all of this stuff, and what's going to happen is we're just going to send the concierge the message hello. Sending it the message hello triggers its initial greeting, which is what we saw printed out in the pink. It tells you what things it can do. And then we wait for user input. And then we take the user input, this user message string, and we send it as an event to the orchestrator event. The orchestrator event triggers this next function, which is called orchestrator. As you can see, it defines itself as accepting the orchestrator event, which is why it gets run. The orchestrator event is kind of the core of this whole thing. It can emit all sorts of events. It can emit a concierge event to send you back to the beginning, but it can also emit stock lookup, authenticate, account balance, transfer money, and stop if it's done. As we do with any agent, we have to define tools. In this case, we define a bunch of very similar looking tools. We define a Python function with a string which says what it does. This is what the agent uses to define which tool it will select. And the one thing that it does is it calls send event. This is the same as returning an event type, except that you can do it more than once. So the stock lookup emits a stock lookup event, authenticate emits an authenticate event, and so forth. We take these functions, we turn them into tools, we create a prompt to the orchestration agent, and we create an orchestration agent using those tools. So the prompt here is special. The orchestration agent doesn't talk to the user directly. It never outputs anything in pink. What it does is it figures out from the string that it's being given, the request that it's being given, it figures out which of these tools to call, and thus it emits the event for the next thing for it to do. The only time that the orchestrator function actually returns is if the prompt couldn't figure out anything, couldn't figure out what tool to call, in which case it returns failed, in which case it returns an orchestrator event, so it just loops. So this is one of the things that Workflows lets you do. Workflows lets you loop in a very easy and obvious way. So let's imagine that we got the stock lookup request that we were just looking at. That's going to trigger the agent to call the stock lookup tool. The stock lookup tool is going to trigger a stock lookup event, which is going to make the workflow go, which function called accepts stock lookup events, and it's this function called stock lookup. Just like we did with the orchestrator, the first thing that we do is we define our tools. This one has 2 special tools. One is for looking up a stock price given the stock symbol, and one is for looking up the stock symbol given just the name of a company. They're very simple, hard-coded things. I'm not actually implementing all of that logic. And then there's a system prompt that tells it that it can use these tools and what those tools do. And then we create a concierge agent, which I'm going to explain in a second, which has these two tools in it. The concierge agent, we're going to go and look at the definition now, accepts all of these parameters and creates an agent. The agent has the tools that we gave it, plus two extra special tools. One is called done, which when the agent thinks that it has completed the task, it can emit a concierge event, which will send you back to the concierge. Having said, I've just completed this thing, or it can say, I can't figure out what to do, in which case it sends a concierge event, but it sends a concierge event with need help equals true, in which case the concierge tries to figure out what went wrong. Just like in the other ones, we create a function calling agent worker from tools. We give it the tools. And then we tell it to handle the event. The first thing that it does is it sends the request that came in with the event to the agent and prints the response. One of the things that the tools can do is send you back to the beginning. So if it's if it thinks it's done or it can't figure it out, it'll just call the tool which emits a concierge event, and also set this parameter which says redirecting. If it's redirecting, it will just print the output and then return none, which means that the next event will get triggered. So if it's done, then it'll see redirecting and it won't do anything further. And then the workflow will pick up the concierge event and send you back to the concierge. If it doesn't send you back to the concierge, if it's not redirecting you, that means it's actually doing something. It's using one of those stock lookup tools, in which case it will do that tool and then ask you for user input. Once it's got the user input, it will call the trigger event, which will send you back to the definition of the class. So over here, when we were defining our concierge agent, we said that the trigger event is a stock lookup event. So when handle event calls trigger event, what it does is it loops. This is another way that we can loop within a workflow. We're looping inside of our concierge loop. So this means that the workflow, the stock lookup workflow, is going to loop on itself until the agent decides that it has answered the question and it calls done. And that's the behavior that we saw. So I said Apple Computer. It used the stock lookup tool to find a stock price for Apple Computer, and then it used the stock lookup tool that looks up what that stock ticker price is, and it printed that out. Then it produced no event because it didn't return anything, but it had called stop. So step concierge got run and we got sent back to the beginning. This is a nice example of how we can loop through a workflow and branch depending on what we need. Just one last thing before I wrap this up is let's look very quickly at a more complicated flow, which is the transfer money agent. The transfer money agent has multiple tools, just like the stock lookup agent, except it has multiple tools that can do different things. So it can transfer your money. It can check if your balance is sufficient. It can check if you have a balance at all. It can check if you're authenticated. And if you're not authenticated, it can authenticate you. How it does that is it calls send event and it emits an authenticate event. It also sets in the context that there's an overall request here called transfer money. So let's go back to the concierge event. Let's say the transfer money has emitted the authenticate event. It will go through the authenticate function. Authenticate will ask you for your username and password, and then it will call done. And when it calls done, it will send you back to the concierge. But when we look at the concierge, we'll see that the concierge has logic that says, if there's an overall request going on, let's send you to that. So the concierge will say, okay, I've just seen you authenticating, you've finished authenticating, now I'm going to send you back to the transfer money function. And the transfer money function will try to complete itself. The transfer money function requires not only that you have completed your authentication, but also that you have checked your balance. So it does this loop twice. It loops backwards from transfer money to authentication, and if you haven't checked your balance, it loops you to the check balance event and does that too. Let's see if this works. Let's run our workflow again. Let's see if we can transfer money. As you can see, it's checking if we're authenticated, and that said, okay, you need to authenticate first. Provide your username and password to proceed with authentication. If I enter my username, the agent is smart enough to figure out that it's not done. So it asks for input again. This is the authenticate loop looping on itself. It's not a real password, and it's hard-coded. Now it authenticates me. As you can see, we saw the overall request is in progress. It's transfer money. Transfer money checked if we authenticated. It checked if the account has a balance. And we haven't checked if we have an account balance, so it says so, and it sends us to the balance checker. So we say, check the balance for our checking account. This is all hard-coded as well, obviously. Now it's sent us back to the transfer money event, and all of the conditions are met. We're authenticated, and we've checked our balance. So let's say from some fake number to some fake number. How much money? $345. And it runs the concierge, and it sends us back to the beginning. Cool. I hope this has been an example of the kind of complicated flows that you can build in workflows. This code in the repo will be linked from the description in the video, so you can check out and see exactly how all of this stuff was done. Thanks for your time.